Hello, it's Randi Rhodes. Here's a clip from our show, and go to randirhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.
Mary had a little man.
The fall. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Believe me. Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
In 1970, a Guatemalan couple decided to send their daughter to the U.S. That young girl was me. I was welcomed here in a loving home. I was not put in a freezing cell. My parents felt they had no choice. My mother died a couple of years later. These parents are making a choice that, frankly, I could not make today for my children. A few months ago, I was away from home for so long, 4 weeks, that my grandson, a 3-year-old, felt he had to reintroduce himself to me because he had not seen me for 4 weeks. He didn't think that I would remember him. Imagine an infant. When that infant is returned to their parent, they will be introduced to a total stranger. Pope Francis said, just tweeted, "Pray together, walk together, work together." This is the way that leads to Christian unity. I urge my colleagues to oppose this rule and this cruel legislation, and let's help those who can't help themselves in these very corrupt countries of the Northern Triangle. They are not S-holes, as the president has referred to them. Let's give them an opportunity to live another day.
That's Congressman Norma Torres from California, obviously a Democrat. Congressman Nora Torres. That is a story that I don't think anybody in this country understood. That we had a Guatemalan congresswoman from California whose parents made the difficult decision to send her to the United States in 1970, and she grew up to be a congresswoman. See, this is how you do it. This is how you get a constituency. This is how you get laws changed. Is, you know, when Cuban Americans who are living here now for, well, I guess Ileana Ross-Layton, and how old is she? She's got to be close to 80, right? 70 something. I just ran into her at a concert. I tweeted out her photo. She's a Republican from Miami, but she's retiring this year, and you know, so we made peace and hugged in the ladies' room. It was very awkward, but she wanted a picture, and she was screaming, "Oh my God, I can't believe it! Take a picture." So anyway, she's a Cuban American, and she ran for Congress all those many years ago, and she's been in Congress ever since. She's retiring now, and what happens is once you get elected by a community, you can now represent that community and give that community a real voice in the legislature, a real voice in the federal government, a real voice in the state legislature first, and then a real voice. And that's what Ileana Ross-Layton did, so that they could get a policy that said that if you could make it here, you could stay here. And she was part of that crowd that got that policy called wet foot, dry foot for Cuban Americans who were making a dangerous journey of 90 miles. Dangerous journey of 90 miles, but in rickety boats to Florida from Cuba, which is 90 miles away. And if you could make that trip, if you could get here, you could stay here. And that's because you have people who represent those people running for office, serving in office, changing the law so that everyone understands that fleeing the Castros or fleeing the Ortegas or fleeing Salvador with death squads or fleeing Honduras, which is Tegucigalpa is the murder capital of the world. If you could get here, you can stay here. And it benefits us. Why? Because immigrant communities have less crime than native communities. That's just a freaking fact. It is indisputable. And there is no surge at the border. We have seen surges at the border when Congressman Torres was sent here by her parents in the 70s.
So, look, let's try to dissect some of what Trump is saying, because, as usual, it's filled with a number of falsehoods, starting with his claim that the number of people crossing the border has exploded. And so what you can see, what he's talking about is he's comparing what's happening this year in terms of border apprehensions to what happened last year in 2017. But what he's ignoring is the fact that in 3 other previous years, the rate of apprehensions was roughly the same as it is now. So if you take out last year as an aberration, there's really no particular change in the number of people trying to cross the border. And in fact, this is also kind of a seasonal high, and generally this declines as the year wears on. So that's sort of lie number one that we can put to rest. The second question is, where does this stand relative to history? And if you go back in history, you can see that the number of border crossings in the last several years has been at the lowest level it's been since 1971. If you go back to the year 2000, it was up over 1.6 million.
1.6
and so
million.
It is possible, if you look at the little extrapolation we did here, that the number of border crossings could be slightly higher this year than it was last year, but we're bumping along in a bottom for a variety of reasons. The financial crisis caused a lot of people from Mexico to decide the U.S. wasn't actually such a great place to come after all. Things in Mexico, notwithstanding some of what we saw there, but in the broader Mexican economy have gotten better. There are more jobs, more things for people to do. And so, in fact, the number of people trying to cross the border has generally been trending down.
Sorry, hate to tell you, everybody, but if you look at 1999 and 2000, those were the peak years, okay? And you had 1.6 million people pouring into the country in 2000. He is just so full of crap. But look what they're doing to these kids now. I mean, what is going to happen to these children? So far, you see that children are being prescribed 10 different shots and pills, including Latuda, as I told you, for bipolar disorder. I don't know what Geodon is. Olanzapine, a Parkinson's medication called benztropine, a seizure medication, anti-seizure medication, clonazepam, which is also, taken by people who have high anxiety and stuff like that, but it's addictive. And if you come off clonazepam without being weaned off of it, you will have seizures. They're also giving nerve pain medication called Divalprex to these kids. Antidepressants, duloxetine, a cognition enhancer called guanfacine, all of them at the same time to these kids. And these centers are given wide berth to determine how much medicine to give each child. One of the moms, Maribel Bernandez, she suspected that her son was being drugged at the Shiloh facility because he sent her a video on WhatsApp, which is, an encrypted app that works all around the world. I use WhatsApp when I'm traveling. And she said he was completely hypnotized and totally lethargic. She's just been reunited with her son in New Orleans. He was 9 years old when they were drugging him this way, and he was in their custody for 6 months. He was seeking his asylum with his mother from Honduras, and this investigative journalist, it's called Reveal, okay? It's a Center for Investigative Journalists. journalism and the Texas Tribune, they saw the records of her son when he was held at Shiloh for the whole 6 months. He was 9 years old when he got there last November. They referred him for psychological issues, and the medical records that she was able to get said he was administered psychotropic drugs and that she objected. She kept objecting. She knew where he was, and she said she would not sign a consent form. And, this group that was doing the investigation, they said, we got no response from them. But the side effects of this medication, according to the attorney for the Los Angeles Center for Human Rights and Constitutional Law, he asked a judge, could you just require that these centers get a parent's permission or at least a court order? I mean, that's what they're down to asking for. Sheila Jackson Lee has actually called for Shiloh to be shut down for physical violence, unreasonable and excessive use of physical restraints, administering emergency medication without notice to governmental authorities, and several deaths of minor children while in custody. But we keep sending children to Shiloh. We've given them $19 million since Congressman Sheila Jackson Lee, who represents this area south of Houston, called for its closure. The most lucrative contract yet, they just collect $5.6 million. $5.6 million for children who are forcibly injected or made to take as many as 18 pills a day. One of the records interviewed by the forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Mills, showed a child taking a battery of shots and pills that included 3 different types of antipsychotic drugs, which Dr. Mills said were improperly prescribed for agitation and aggressive behavior. They also managed to interview 20 of the children, the lawyers did, and all of them had been medicated. The parents he interviewed described the results, quote, I understand they are requiring my daughter to take very powerful medications for anxiety. I've noted that my daughter is becoming more nervous, fearful, and she trembles. My daughter tells me that she has fallen several times and injured her head and arms to the point where she ended up in a wheelchair because the medications were too powerful. She couldn't walk. She's complained about the medications to the staff that they make her take. The medications also make her afraid of people. There are court exhibits that suggest improper use of the medication, and asked how such drugs and dosages would make children feel. Dr. Mills said they feel like shit. They feel like they've given up their own control, and the long-term complications are weight gain and adult onset diabetes. These drugs are not benign. That's just one place, okay, that keeps on getting contracts. It's run by an accountant. I looked up on Common Cause, where they look at contributions. I could not find any big money contributions this man made. I only found a $1,000 contribution that he made in 1995. So I don't know what the deal is. I really don't. But then you've got this other story about the Shenandoah Valley Juvenile Center in Virginia. So this is a whole other state, all right? Here you have immigrant children as young as 14 housed in a juvenile detention center who say they were beaten while handcuffed and put in solitary confinement and restrained in chairs, sitting up with bags over their heads for 10 days at a time. Immigrant children as young as 14 housed at a juvenile detention center in Virginia say they were beaten while handcuffed and locked up for long periods in solitary confinement, left nude and shivering in concrete cells. The abuse claims against the Shenandoah Valley Juvenile Center near Staunton, Virginia, are detailed in federal court filings that include a half a dozen sworn statements from Latino teens jailed there for months or years. Multiple detainees say the guards stripped them of their clothes, strapped them to chairs with bags placed over their heads. Quote, whenever they used to restrain me and put me in the chair, they would handcuff me, said a Honduran immigrant who was sent to the facility when he was 15 years old. Quote, strap me down all the way from your feet all the way to your chest. You really couldn't move. They have total control over you. They also put a bag over your head. It has little holes. You can see through it, but you feel really suffocated with the bag on. In addition to the children's first-hand translated accounts in court filings, a former child development specialist who worked inside the facility independently told the Associated Press this week that she saw kids there with bruises and broken bones. They blamed on the guards. She spoke on the condition of anonymity because she was not authorized to publicly discuss the children's cases, which means she signed a non-disclosure agreement. She said, "It reminds me of going into animal shelters. Border Patrol is detaining children in cages." In court filings, lawyers for the detention facility have denied all the allegations of physical abuse detailed in the lawsuit, which spanned from 2015 to 2018. You know what they're doing? They're accusing these kids of being gang members, and they're not. They came... I mean, the top manager at the Shenandoah Center said under oath at a congressional hearing, the children do not appear to be gang members. But they kept saying, oh, well, these are the children that belong to the violent gangs, including MS-13. They said, no, they're not gang members. They've been screened. They're not gang involved.
The Randi Rhodes Show is live on RandiRhodes.com and the free Progressive Voices app for Android and iOS. Visit the App Store or ProgressiveVoices.com now.
But then lastly, let's deal with this question of whether the people who come here, as Trump famously said, are rapists, murderers, and carrying drugs, and a few good people, and look at what the record is of immigrants who actually come to the country. So what you can see here is that illegal immigrants actually are incarcerated at half the rate of native-born Americans, and legal immigrants are actually incarcerated at an even lower rate than that. And so this whole notion that we're bringing in gang members, we're bringing in people who are going to rape, murder, and pillage our country is simply not borne out by the facts.
Facts. Stubborn little things, aren't they? Yeah, stubborn little fuckers. Facts. Okay, the Shenandoah lockup is one of only 3 juvenile detention facilities in the United States with federal contracts to provide, quote, secure placement for children who had problems. The Yolo County Juvenile Detention Facility in California has faced litigation over immigrant children mischaracterized as gang members. In Alexandria, Virginia, a multi-jurisdiction commission overseeing the Northern Virginia Juvenile Detention Center has said it will end its federal contract to house young immigration detainees when it expires in September. Woohoo! We won one. 80 more to go. Now there's 81 facilities under contract with the federal government. We have spent $1.5 billion on these places. On these places. Okay, the people in this particular place, they are male, they are female, they are immigrants. There's 58 beds. They are between the ages of 12 and 17. They are awaiting the adjudication of their asylum claims, meaning they broke no law, but we put children in detention facilities similar to a prison. They have been convicted of no crime, 0, none. But Virginia, where I've had a civil case in Virginia, okay, that's where the defense contractor sued me. In the state of Virginia, Northern Virginia specifically, which is where we're talking about right now. And in Virginia, for civil cases, they have something called the rocket docket. You know what that means? Goes woo really fast. Yeah? Well, when it comes to claims of asylum, they're worst in the nation for wait times. Their federal immigration court, this is not federal criminal court, this is an immigration court. The average wait for a child to have their claim of asylum heard, 806 days. There are 365 days in a year. You do the math. It's almost 3 years in facilities like these. Only half of these kids are represented by a lawyer. Only half of them. 92 of these kids cycle through this place. Most of them are from Central America. They say, oh, well, they have mental health needs, and, so we have to drug them. They would, if you had a child with a mental health need, we don't put them in Willowbrook. It's the one good thing Geraldo ever did, was bust open these mental health facilities for children where children were naked and rocking back and forth on the floor and over-medicated and treated like garbage. We don't have orphanages anymore because institutional settings are not healthy for living things. And if they do have significant behavioral issues, they belong in residential treatment. This particular center got $4.2 million in federal funds last year to house immigrant children. The lawsuits filed against Shenandoah alleges that young Latino immigrants are held there and subjected to unconstitutional conditions that shock the conscience, including violence by staff, abusive and excessive use of seclusion and restraints, and the denial of necessary mental health care. Oh, they have mental health issues. We have to charge you more for these kids, but they withhold mental health treatment. This complaint was filed by a nonprofit group called Washington Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Urban Affairs, and they recount the story for us in this article about a 17-year-old Mexican citizen apprehended at the southern border. He fled an abusive father and violence fueled by drug cartels to seek asylum in the United States. After stops at facilities in Texas and then transferred to New York, he was transferred to Virginia, to Shenandoah, in April of 2016 and diagnosed during an initial screening by a psychologist with 3 different mental disorders, including depression. But besides weekly sessions speaking with a counselor, he has received no further mental health treatment, such as medications that might help regulate his moods or behavior. So on the one hand, you got this one in Texas that are medicating kids that are just suffering from the typical depression of separation from their parents, the typical agitation of not knowing where they are, the typical trauma of making such a perilous journey, and they're being medicated to the hilt. On the other hand, you got these kids who have been screened, diagnosed, and they withhold mental health treatment. The lawsuit recounts multiple alleged violent incidents between Latino children and staff at the Shenandoah Center. It describes the guards as mostly white, non-Spanish speakers who are undertrained in dealing with individuals with mental illness. The suit alleges staff members routinely taunt the Latino youths with racially charged epithets. Gee, they call them wetback and onion head and pendejo, which means dumbass. A 16-year-old who said he'd lived in Texas with his mother since he was an infant ended up in Shenandoah in September after a police officer pulled over a car he was riding in and asked him for ID, which he couldn't provide. He was fluent in English, and so he started translating for the other detainees. He told them the taunts and the names the staff members were calling them, and he said that angered the guards. So he lost his modest privilege of attending art class. Quote, if you are behaving badly, resisting the staff when they try to remove you from the program, they will take everything in your room away, your mattress, your blanket, everything, he said. They will also take your clothes. Then they will leave you locked in there for a while. This has happened to me, and I know it's happened to other kids too. They also house white juveniles who are being held on criminal charges in the same facility. Now, these are kids who have been charged with nothing. These are kids who are awaiting the adjudication of their asylum claims. around 806 days worth of waiting. Now, the white kids that are in there also, they are being held on criminal charges. The Latino kids are segregated, and they see the other housing units have amenities that include plush chairs and video gaming consoles, not available in their pods, their Spartan pods. In their sworn statements, the teens reported spending the bulk of their days locked alone in their cells, with few hours set aside for classroom instruction, recreation, or meals. Some say they've not been allowed outdoors. The U.S.-born children are afforded spacious recreation yards. The Latino children reported being fed sparsely and often receiving cold meals that left them hungry, though meals of American fast food were occasionally provided. Records show Shenandoah receives nearly $82,000 a year from the Agriculture Department to feed the detainees, the immigration detainees. The lawsuit said the poor conditions, frequent physical searches, and verbal abuse by staff often escalated into confrontation as the frustrated children acted out. The staff regularly responded by physically assaulting the youth, applying an excessive amount of force that goes far beyond what is needed to establish or regain control. In the case of a 17-year-old Mexican girl, the lawsuit said a staff member who suspected him of possessing contraband, it's a 17-year-old boy, of possessing contraband, threw him to the ground, forcibly tore off his clothes, saying it was a strip search. And although no forbidden items were found, the teenager was transferred to Alpha Pod, which is described in the lawsuit as a unit within the facility designed for children who engage in bad behavior. The lawsuit said Latino children were frequently punished by being restrained for hours in chairs with handcuffs on and cloth shackles on their legs. Often, the lawsuit alleges, the children were beaten by staff while bound. As a result of such, quote, malicious and sadistic applications of force, the immigrant youths have sustained significant injuries, both physical and psychological, the lawsuit said. After an altercation during which the lawsuit alleged the Mexican teenager bit a staff member during a beating, he was restrained in handcuffs and shackles for 10 days, resulting in bruises and cuts. Other teens interviewed as part of the court case also report they were punished for minor infractions by being put in solitary confinement, during which some of the children say they were left nude and shivering in cold concrete cells. Academic studies of prison inmates kept in solitary confinement have found they often experience high anxiety that causes panic attacks, paranoia, disordered thinking that may trigger angry outbursts. And for those with mental health issues, the effects can be exacerbated, worsening the very behaviors the staff says they are trying to discourage. A Guatemalan youth sent to the center when he was 14 said he was often locked in his tiny cell for up to 23 hours a day. After resisting the guards, he said he was also restrained for long periods. Quote, when they couldn't get one of the kids to calm down, the guards would put us in a chair, a safety chair. I don't know exactly why they call it that, but they would just put us in there all day, the teen said in a sworn statement. This happened to me, and I saw it to happen to others too. It was excessive. A 15-year-old at Shenandoah for 9 months also recounted being restrained with a bag over his head. Quote, they handcuffed me and put a white bag of some kind over my head, according to his sworn statement. They took off all my clothes and put me in a restraint chair where they attached my hands and feet to the chair. They also put a strap across my chest. They left me naked and attached to that chair for 2.5 days, including nights. He tried to kill himself in August. They punished him with further isolation. He has responded to his desperation and hopelessness by cutting his wrists with a piece of glass, banging his head against the wall or floor. Quote, "One time I cut myself after I had gotten into a fight with staff. I filled the room with blood. This happened on a Friday, but it wasn't until Monday they gave me a bandage or medicine for the pain." Other immigrant youths at Shenandoah have also engaged in cutting and self-harming behaviors, including ingesting shampoo and trying to choke themselves dead. A hearing is set for July 3rd before a federal judge in the Western District of Virginia. Go to RandiRhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.